in an entirely laudable, valiant effort to stay close to Bush in order to maximize influence on what otherwise could have been a dangerous phenomenon in world politics, Tony became part of the Bush judgment.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. We are discussing Blair's decision to go to war and the options open to his successor, Gordon Brown, with John Rentall, Blair's biographer, and Lindsey German, national convener of the Stop the War Coalition. Lindsey, perhaps Gordon Brown, when that decision was made back in 2003, he never had a chance, and not many people had. But right now, what are the options open to him? Can he pull the troops out?
Well, I think he should pull the troops out. I don't think he's going to. I'd be very, very surprised if he broke from Bush. I think that's what most people in this country want. A recent opinion poll showed that only 14% thought the war was justified and that the troops should stay there. So I think it's what most people in Britain want. But I think he is still saying that he's going to keep the troops there. And the longer he does it, the more damage it will cause and the more likely that his legacy ends up similar to that of Blair.
They haven't been very effective, are they, John, in the Basra region? 40% of the Sunnis that they lived in Basra have been cleansed and shortened to 14%. The militias are wreaking havoc in the region. Jaish al-Mahdi, al-Fadila, as well as Kiri, they are in control of Basra and the smuggling of the oil. So what are they doing there?
It's true that they haven't been doing. They haven't been able to do very much, and because there weren't enough troops put into Iraq in the first place. And now that they're basically just in their garrisons, and they're just trying to defend themselves and do what they can to assist the Iraqi security forces. But the problem with this question has always been right from after the invasion. The Iraqi people say that they want the occupiers to go home. And they even say they want them to go home straight away. But then when you say, well, you know, this week, then they say, no, well, we better stay until the security situation is better. And of course, the security situation gets worse. And now the situation is still the same, that nobody actually wants the British troops to go straight away, because there are still things that have to be done in Basra. The situation there is still not good enough to allow them to go, even though their very presence there is part of the problem.
Lindsey, al-Maliki, the Iraqi prime minister, whenever somebody talks about pulling the troops, he says, please don't go.
Well, of course, because his government wouldn't last very long if the troops went. That's the honest truth of the matter. So of course he wants them to stay, but actually, as a matter of fact, most Iraqis, according to opinion polls, which I agree with John, aren't necessarily that scientific in Iraq because of the terrible situation there, but most opinion polls show a majority who do want the troops to go. And there was a demonstration of 1 million people under Iraqi national flags a few weeks ago, also calling for the troops to go. So I think you have to conclude, far from it being that people say don't go yet, this may be a small number of people, again, as you said earlier, in the green zone. I don't think it's the view of many people there. And let's look at what the British troops are doing. I mean, Jonathan Steele in The Guardian put it very well today. I thought he said that the British government are holding their troops hostage because they don't want to offend Bush by withdrawing them. But in reality, they're being withdrawn to the airport. They're not able to do anything. And the 2 British bases in the centre of Basra have been 2 of the 3 most heavily attacked bases in Iraq over the last year or 2. And that's Ministry of Defence figures.
The recent report by the International Crisis Group, John, which was issued on Tuesday, talks about that Basra somehow is divided into 3 categories, so to speak. Jaish al-Mahdi is in control of the police and the security. Skiri is in control of the intelligence, and al-Fadila is in control of the oil industry. And those 3 militias are competing between them, carving out the area, and the British are just sitting there and watching. It doesn't say much to the vaunted British experience of colonial administration of occupied territories, does it?
Well, no, it's a very difficult situation in Iraq. But I mean, I have to contradict Lindsey again. I mean, most Iraqi people say they want the British and American troops to go, but you ask them when, and they say not yet, because the situation would be worse if they went than if they continued to stay. Even in Basra, I think the situation would become worse, because I think their very presence there acts as some kind of restraining force on the competing militias.
Lindsay, Gordon Brown is very close to the Democrats. He is looking at an election perhaps in 2 years from now. President Bush is, as soon as January starts, he gets into the lame duck period, and there isn't much as anything anybody can do. It wouldn't make sense a lot for Gordon Brown to become buddy-buddy with George Bush now, does it?
Well, the problem is, although I think Bush is probably already in the lame duck phase because the Democrats control Congress, but I think that that doesn't mean he won't do things, and that doesn't mean that he can't be quite dangerous in a period like that.
What will he do?
Well, it's possible. He can do all sorts of things. He can bomb Iran. He can send more troops into Iraq, as he did at the end of last year, although the surge has proved to be a disaster. So I don't really see Brown breaking from him. And also, the Democrats in the States, although they say they're against the war, so far, they've gone along with Bush when he's vetoed the bills for cutting spending, as he did recently. The Democrats haven't really fought over that. So I don't see a big difference. I know Brown is spinning, or his supporters are spinning, that, you know, David Miliband was always against the war, except, of course, he did vote for it in Parliament in 2003 and all these other questions. But in reality, I don't see a massive change, except I think they will try to disentangle themselves, but without antagonizing the Americans, and that's probably an almost impossible task.
One potential reason, John, for keeping the British troops, some analysts say, although they are a paltry 5,500, no more than that, is if President Bush decides next year to bomb Iran, those troops, they might become
Please,
important.
Just see, what kind of question is that? Why would President Bush decide to bomb Iran unless there was some emergency situation where Iran is on the verge of acquiring nuclear weapons, in which case I think it's very important that the international community should do something to stop that.
Well, the hawks have been talking in Washington, as the Israelis have been talking, about an imminent airstrike against Iran. Now, that has been put back by a number of things.
Do you think it's a good idea that Iran should acquire nuclear weapons? I mean, that's the important question before we start attacking George Bush for being a warmonger.
I'm not in favour of anybody having nuclear weapons, but I don't know why we're all
so what are you
so
going to do
excited.
about it, Lindsay?
Well, I don't know why we're all getting so excited about Iran when Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons. So let's talk about disarmament.
So it's all right for everybody else to have them?
Well, I don't think it's all right for everybody else to have them, but I don't believe that it should be a basis for war against Iran, and I certainly would not support that under any circumstance. In
the long run, John, would you say that the decision to go to war was, in the end, justified?
Yes, absolutely justified. It has turned out very badly. I fully accept that. But on the basis of the information that was available at the time, it was the right thing to do. I think it's a terrible shame the way it has turned out.
A final word to Lindsay. Many people say this is the worst decision by the British government since the Suez. Would you agree with that, or is that an overstretch?
I think it's much more serious than Suez. I think it will have much longer term consequences than Suez, and already it's gone on for 4 years with the terrible deaths and everything else that we've seen. So no, I think it's the biggest mistake of foreign policy that any British government has made since long before Suez. Probably
National convener of the Stop the War Coalition, Lindsay German, biographer of Tony Blair, journalist and author John Rentoul. Thank you very much for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.